My parents forced me to quit my part-time job because it damaged the family's image and spent my college fund on my sister's Europe trip. Then my grandparents stepped in and covered my tuition. My family ran on image lies and favoritism. I got treated like free labor while my sister burned through everything we had. So I said screw it, built my own plan, and walked away. But of course my parents weren't done trying to control the narrative before it all blew up. Here's how it started. My name's Cash. I'm 18 now, but this happened when I was 17. I live in a suburb where people care more about their lawns than their actual bank accounts. Every driveway has a shiny car. Every house has perfect hedges, and everyone pretends they're doing better than they really are. My parents fit right in with that mindset. Image is the main priority in our house. Everything else comes second. My parents, Miller and Caroline, run a cafe called Crossroads Cup. From the outside, it looks great. Warm lights, cute decor, always something posted on Instagram stories. But inside, it's basically a slow-motion financial disaster. The machines break down all the time. Bills stack up behind the counter, and half the good days only look good because my parents talk them up like they're running the next Starbucks. They keep the place alive through sheer ego and denial. I have an older sister, Liliana, who they treat like the family's personal billboard. She's the brand for us. Sorority girl, expensive clothes, study abroad photos, the whole polished lifestyle. If she overspends, they shrug it off as her building her future. They show her off like proof that we're still doing well even when we're not. Then there's me. I'm the one who's supposed to quietly keep things running. I call myself the invisible asset because that's exactly how it feels. I'm not the favorite, not the one they brag about, not the child they place bets on. I'm the one expected to shut up, show up, and make their lives easier. I do the behind-the-scenes work nobody wants to admit is necessary. That includes Crossroads Cup. What people don't know is that I close the cafe for free most nights. I'm the one sweeping floors, wiping tables, restocking fridges, and finishing inventory because my parents refused to hire actual staff they'd have to pay. They call it helping the family business, but it's really just unpaid labor dressed up as loyalty. If I don't show up, the cafe falls apart. Simple as that. Both sets of grandparents have tried helping a few times. Not dramatically, just offering advice, covering a bill here and there, even recommending someone who could fix equipment cheap. But every time Miller shuts it down instantly. He treats help like it's a personal attack. He'll say things like, "We're not a charity case," or "We can handle our own business." Meanwhile, Caroline pretends she agrees, but won't look anyone in the eye when she says it. My grandparents can see the cracks. They've pulled me aside more than once asking if everything's okay or if I need anything. I always told them I was fine. At that point, I still felt like admitting anything would make everything worse. Miller had this rule: you don't talk about money, you don't talk about problems, and you definitely don't bring them outside the house. But even with all the pretending, the truth wasn't hidden that deeply. The house was tense. The cafe felt like a sinking ship, and Liliana was still living her polished college lifestyle like she was the princess of a brand new franchise. I'm not someone who panics easily, but I'm not blind either. I could see that our family's confidence was just performance. Nothing felt solid. Everything depended on pretending. And the older I got, the more I started realizing I couldn't rely on that. I didn't hate my parents. I just couldn't trust the version of reality they were selling. And once that clicked, I knew I needed options that didn't depend on Miller and Caroline figuring out their finances or magically becoming responsible overnight. By the time this chapter of my life was closing, I'd already started thinking about backup plans. Secretly, quietly, because someone in the family had to think about the future without pretending, and that someone sure wasn't going to be Miller, Caroline, or the brand. I didn't get a job because I hated my parents or because I wanted to rebel. I got a job because I could see what was coming. Crossroads Cup wasn't growing. Liliana's spending wasn't slowing down. And Miller acted like admitting financial stress would kill him. I knew if I didn't prepare myself, no one else would. So I decided to build my own safety net quietly. During the day, I was just another high school student. Homework, group projects, practice, normal stuff. But once school ended, I changed hats. Some nights I went straight to the bowling alley where I picked up a part-time job cleaning lanes and wiping down tables. Other nights, I'd get a text from Miller at 3 in the afternoon that said something like, "Be at the cafe by 8, we need to look busy for the dinner crowd." Which meant I'd be working the closing shift for free again. I learned pretty fast that my life had to run on 2 tracks if I wanted any chance at a future. So I kept my head down at school, worked at whichever job needed me, and then wrapped up the night scrubbing espresso machines at Crossroads Cup. To make everything blend together, I started planning like someone who expected to get caught eventually. I kept a small notebook hidden in my backpack where I wrote down every hour I worked, every dollar I earned, and every dollar I saved. I didn't save much, but it was something. I kept my cash in an old pencil box under my bed next to important receipts. I told myself it wasn't hiding. I told myself it was just being organized. But the truth was, I didn't want my parents to know what I had because once they knew, it wouldn't stay mine. Next, I moved to a bookstore job. That's where I met Dariel, a guy in his late 20s who worked 2 jobs and didn't romanticize anything. He talked about money the way people talk about weather, straightforward and without emotion. He noticed me budgeting during break once and said, "Good, start early. Families get weird about money." I shrugged, pretending not to understand. He gave me a look and said, "I've seen a lot of kids think their parents will take care of everything. They don't. Get your own paperwork in order. Save what you can, and don't tell anyone how much you've saved. That's how you stay safe." The advice stuck. Dariel wasn't dramatic. He was practical. He made me realize how fast things can turn when people feel like they're losing control. So I kept saving quietly and working quietly. I thought staying under the radar would be enough. It wasn't. The betrayal came from a neighbor named Mrs. Brown. She wasn't evil, just one of those suburban moms who notices everything because she doesn't have anything else going on. One afternoon, she walked into the bookstore to buy a greeting card. She froze when she saw me behind the counter. I smiled awkwardly and said, "Hey." She smiled back like she just found a coupon she wasn't supposed to have. Mrs. Brown didn't just know me. She was one of Crossroads Cup's regulars, the kind who called my mom sweetie and asked about the family like she was part of it. In our neighborhood, a kid working retail didn't mean responsible. It meant something was wrong at home. It meant the cafe wasn't enough. And if that rumor took off, it wouldn't stay a rumor. People would stop tipping, stop coming in, start choosing the next place over because nobody wants to buy coffee from a business that looks like it's sinking. The next morning, Miller waited for me in the kitchen. His arms were crossed, his jaw tight. "So you're working now?" he said, loud enough that it echoed. I said yes. There wasn't a point in lying. "Do you understand what you just did?" he snapped. "Mrs. Brown goes in there and tells 3 other people, and by lunch, everyone thinks Crossroads Cup can't even afford to keep its own kid in school without him working. That's how businesses die in this town. Whispers first, receipts later." Caroline stood by the sink, shaking her head, like this was a scandal, not a job. Liliana walked in halfway through the shouting and laughed. "You're working retail. Seriously, that's embarrassing for the whole family." The anger wasn't about safety or rules. It was about optics. Miller paced the room like he was performing the outrage for an audience. "People will think we can't provide for you," he said. "Do you want rumors about our finances?" I didn't respond because anything I said would have made it worse. That night, the yelling turned into a negotiation that wasn't really a negotiation. Miller said, "Quit the job and I'll take care of your tuition. All of it. You focus on school. I'll handle the money." He said it with full confidence, like quitting would magically fix everything. Caroline nodded as if this was a generous offer. Liliana stood behind them with her arms folded, smirking. The pressure in the house was constant, so I quit. I walked into the bookstore the next day and told the manager I couldn't continue. He looked disappointed but understood. Dariel slapped a hand on my shoulder and said, "Family stuff." I just nodded. The second I quit, I felt it in my gut. I just surrendered my only leverage. I walked back home and Miller was suddenly calm. Too calm. He acted like everything was solved now that I wasn't making the family look poor anymore. His confidence didn't feel like reassurance. It felt like a trap. It didn't take long after I quit the bookstore job for things to crack open. A week later, Miller and Caroline called me into the living room. No build-up, no attempt at softening anything. Miller just said, "Sit down. We need to talk about your college situation." I knew instantly it wasn't going to be good news. Caroline folded her hands in her lap like she was bracing herself. Miller cleared his throat and said, "The college fund is empty." No explanation, no apology, just the headline. I stared at him. "What do you mean empty?" Caroline jumped in quickly. "It's gone cash. There's nothing left for your tuition." Then came the reason, and somehow it felt worse than the announcement itself. "Your sister needed it," Miller said. Liliana's expenses this year were higher than we expected. Higher meant things like her summer in Europe, her sorority fees, and her senior year aesthetic, which apparently included upgraded housing, new wardrobes, and a photography package so she could post her journey online. They didn't even try to hide that it was all luxury. Caroline added, "She couldn't just not go. You know how important those programs are for her future." Miller nodded at himself like this was common sense. She's a girl. She needs the safety net. You're a man, Cash. You can figure it out. They said it calmly, like it was smart parenting, not blatant favoritism. Before I could even respond, Liliana strolled in from the hallway, earbuds still in. When she realized what the conversation was about, she smirked and leaned on the arm of the couch. "Don't act shocked," she said. "You weren't really expecting some giant vault of money waiting for you." Caroline shot her a warning look, but Liliana kept going. "You're too mid for a top school anyway. Maybe community college is better, less pressure." She said it casually, like she wasn't talking about my entire future. I looked at Miller. "So what exactly is your plan for me?" Miller lifted his shoulders like this wasn't that big of a deal. "Loans, work, study, you'll manage. Boys always do." He said it with full confidence, as if being a teenage boy magically paid tuition. That was when I decided to drop my backup plan into the conversation. "I already talked to Grandma and Grandpa," I said. "They said they'll pay my tuition directly." I hadn't told them everything yet, but I'd seen enough. Overdue bills, broken machines, my parents panicking in private to know the college money might already be gone. Caroline's face blanched. Miller froze like someone unplugged him. "You what?" he asked, voice sharp. "I talked to them weeks ago," I said. "They knew enough to understand things weren't stable. They offered to help." Liliana scoffed. "You actually begged the grandparents? That's pathetic." I ignored her. Miller looked like someone cracked his armor open. Not because he cared about my education, but because he hadn't been included. He wasn't the one holding the financial power anymore. "This is unacceptable," he said. "You don't go behind our backs and involve my in-laws in our private matters." "They offered," I said, "and I accepted because I needed a real plan." My mom whispered, "Cash, you should have come to us first." "I did," I said. "You promised you'd take care of it, and then you told me the money was gone." That was when Miller's ego truly snapped. "You're extorting them," he shouted, "manipulating them with some sob story so they'll pay for you. You're making us look incompetent." He stood up and pointed at me like I was some threat to the family brand. "You embarrassed us with that job, and now you're embarrassing us with this." I didn't say anything this time. There was nothing to say. It wasn't about the job, the money, the college fund, or even college. It was about Miller losing control. By that evening, the smear campaign had already started. Miller called his brother, then his cousins, then his mother. I heard snippets through the wall. "He went behind our backs. He's twisting Caroline's parents around his finger. He's turning into a problem." And by the next morning, extended family members were texting me things like, "You shouldn't pressure your grandparents, and your parents are doing their best." None of them knew the real story. They only knew Miller's version. Caroline didn't correct any of them. She walked around the house stiff and quiet, scared of what people would say if they learned the truth. She followed Miller's narrative because it was easier to maintain the image than admit they had failed me. Liliana enjoyed every second of it. She walked past my room with a smug grin like she had won some competition I didn't even know we were in. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a disagreement anymore. It wasn't even about tuition. It was a coordinated effort to control the story, isolate me, and make me look like the one tearing the family apart. After the college fund blowout, the house changed overnight. It wasn't just tense. It became a place where every small action felt monitored, restricted, or punished. The silence wasn't passive. It was a tactic. The first shift was subtle. Caroline stopped asking if I ate. Then she stopped cooking enough food for everyone. There'd be dinner for 3, Miller, Caroline, and Liliana, and I'd be left to figure something out. If I tried to make myself something, Miller would step into the kitchen and say, "Don't touch that, it's for tomorrow." No discussion, just rules appearing out of nowhere. Then the internet vanished. Not a glitch, blocked. My devices couldn't connect, but everyone else's worked fine. When I asked about it, Liliana shrugged. Dad said, "You don't need distractions. Focus on your responsibilities." The responsibilities part stung. I didn't have any left in their eyes except to fall back in line. Small punishments stacked up every day. Laundry accidentally not washed. My room's door taken off the hinges for airflow. On my phone charger missing. Caroline acting like she didn't know where anything went. None of it was accidental. None of it felt random. Liliana made everything worse. She wasn't hiding her involvement anymore. She followed me around the house, quietly watching. If I stepped outside to call someone, she'd report it to Miller. If I texted a friend, she'd walk by slowly and glance at the screen. If I shut my door, she'd stand in the hall and say, "What are you hiding?" She became Miller's personal informant. I heard her once through the wall saying, He left the house at 3. He's talking to someone. I think it's Grandma. She said it like she was giving a progress report. Miller used her updates to build a narrative that I was becoming out of control. He'd say things like, "You're acting unpredictable, Cash. Don't make this harder." Meanwhile, he was the one tightening every screw he could find. The turning point was when Eric Miller's brother showed up unexpectedly one afternoon. He asked me to walk with him to the driveway. He didn't bother pretending this was a friendly visit. "Look," he said quietly, "he's done this before." I didn't know what he meant. Eric sighed. "Miller, when our parents tried to help us, he turned it into a power game. He made everything about control. He pushed them away, then blamed them for not supporting him. Now he's doing it to you." It was the first time anyone in the family spoke plainly. "He needs someone under him," Eric continued. "He always has. When he feels that slipping, he gets vindictive. You need to protect yourself." Before I could respond, Eric handed me a small folder. "These are the things you need to secure now. Don't wait." Inside were lists: Social Security card, birth certificate, passport, banking documents, anything tied to my identity or my future. "If he holds these," Eric said, "he owns your choices. Get them somewhere safe." I nodded. It wasn't dramatic advice, it was practical. I understood that. Over the next few days, I worked quietly. I found my Social Security card taped inside a filing cabinet drawer, the birth certificate buried under insurance papers, my passport shoved behind expired coupons in a kitchen drawer. I gathered what belonged to me, kept copies where needed, and stored the originals in my backpack. Eric helped me without telling anyone else, but nothing stays hidden long in a house built on paranoia. One morning, Miller burst into my room without knocking. "Where are the documents?" His tone wasn't confused, it was accusatory. "Which documents?" I asked. He scanned the room like he was looking for stolen jewelry. "Don't play dumb. Papers are missing. You took things that belong to this family." "They are my documents," I said. "My identity, my school forms." "That doesn't matter," he snapped. "You don't get to decide what's yours yet." Caroline stood behind him, silent but shaking slightly. Liliana watched from the hallway, enjoying every second. Miller stepped closer. "You're not going anywhere until I have everything back." There was no reasoning with him. He wasn't angry because the documents were missing. He was angry because he no longer had control over them, and by extension over me. That night, I slept with my backpack against my chest, not because I thought they'd hurt me, but because I didn't trust them not to take what I needed to function. Every hour or so, Liliana walked past my open doorway, pretending she needed something from the hall closet. She kept glancing inside like she was waiting for me to bolt. By the end of the week, I wasn't living like a teenager in his own house anymore. I was living like someone preparing to evacuate. Packing silently, hiding essentials, watching doors, planning exit routes. Miller didn't see me as his son. He saw me as a threat to the story he was trying to sell, and the house treated me accordingly. After Miller's accusations about the documents, the hostility at home reached a level where staying didn't make sense anymore. My maternal grandparents noticed something was wrong and insisted I come stay with them for a few days. Once I got there, they made it clear those few days could be as long as I needed. They didn't ask for details immediately. They let me settle in, fed me properly, and gave me space. The calm felt foreign after weeks of tension, but calm never lasts long when Miller realizes he's losing control. My grandparents called a meeting at their house. Caroline and Miller showed up looking irritated, but trying to keep it civil. Liliana came too dressed like she was attending a brunch rather than a confrontation. My grandfather didn't waste time. He sat down, looked Miller straight in the eye and said, "You've been treating Cash unfairly. We're not ignoring it anymore." Miller scoffed. "You don't know the full situation." Grandma cut in. "We know enough. We know the college fund was emptied on Liliana's luxuries instead of helping both children. We know Cash has been working behind the scenes without recognition, and we know you've made him feel unsafe in his own home." Caroline froze. Miller's jaw tightened. Liliana crossed her arms like she was waiting for her turn to speak. Miller tried denial first. "We never favored anyone. We support both kids." Grandpa didn't blink. "No. You support one child and you use the other." The room went silent for a few seconds. Then Miller switched to justification. Liliana needed opportunities. She needed certain experiences for her future. Cash is resilient. He can figure things out. Grandma leaned forward. "Favoring a daughter because she's a girl is not wisdom. It's wrong. And expecting Cash to silently carry the burden is unacceptable." Caroline finally spoke. "You're making it sound worse than it is. we're doing the best we can. You threatened him, Grandma said. You cut off food, you cut off internet, you let your daughter spy on him. That is not doing your best. Liliana jumped in. He's being dramatic. You're all acting like he's some victim. He's getting everything handed to him now. Tuition housing sympathy. Meanwhile, I have to maintain a whole social image for my program. Grandpa laughed not kindly. You maintain it with their money. Money that should have been shared. Liliana rolled her eyes. Whatever. Cash always plays the sad little martyr. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that would change her mindset. Extended family started hearing fragments of this confrontation almost immediately. A cousin texted me, "Did you really call your dad abusive?" Another said, "Your parents told us you've been acting unstable." Rumors spread fast, twisted depending on who told them. Half the family assumed I was exaggerating. The other half assumed Miller finally cracked. To protect his image, Miller shifted into full performance mode. Within a week, he hosted a backyard barbecue and invited neighbors, coworkers, and relatives. He posed for photos with Liliana, acted cheerful, and talked loudly about how family is everything. Caroline floated around refilling drinks, smiling too hard. Anyone watching could tell they were trying to rewrite the narrative before it solidified. At one point during the barbecue, Miller pulled me aside. "You're confusing everyone," he said through clenched teeth. "You're making this family look divided." "We are divided," I answered. He ignored that. "All you had to do was trust us, but you ran to your grandparents and made us look weak." I walked away. He hated that I didn't argue. It meant he couldn't twist my words later. A few days after the event, Miller and Caroline came to my grandparents' house for another talk. This one wasn't a confrontation. It was a proposition. Miller started with a calm tone which always meant trouble. "We're willing to help with your tuition," he said, "but there are conditions." Caroline nodded along. "You'll publicly clarify," Miller continued, "that the grandparents were never paying your tuition, that it was a misunderstanding. You'll thank us for our support, and you'll tell anyone who asked that everything's fine now." I stared at him. "You want me to lie?" "We want you to correct the narrative," Caroline said quickly. Miller added, "You want to go to college, don't you? This is the cleanest way." I shook my head immediately. "No, I'm not doing that." Miller's expression hardened. "Why not?" "Because you're not offering help," I said. "You're offering a cover-up." He stepped closer. "You realize what you're throwing away. I already have tuition covered," I said. "You don't have anything to offer." For a moment, the room went dead still. Caroline looked embarrassed. Liliana looked furious. Miller looked dangerous. "You think you've won because your grandparents stepped in," he said quietly. "You think this is over?" Grandpa stood up then, but Miller raised a hand. "No, I want him to hear this." He leaned in just enough so only I could hear the next part. "I'm not done." He said it without shouting, without theatrics, just cold certainty. That was the exact moment I understood something clearly. He wasn't trying to fix anything. He was preparing for the next attack, and he didn't care who he had to drag down with him. The moment I stopped covering closing shifts at Crossroads Cup, the decline started showing. It didn't take long. Customers weren't getting their orders right. Tables stayed dirty. The milk steamer broke and sat unrepaired for days. One regular even posted online, "What happened to this place used to be great." Miller pretended not to see the comments, but everyone who walked in could see something was wrong. I wasn't there every night anymore, but people talk in a suburb like ours, and Eric filled in the rest when he stopped by my grandparents' house. Without my free labor, the nights fell apart fastest. The cafe closed early 3 times in a single week. Deliveries weren't checked in correctly. Inventory lists didn't match what was actually on the shelves. It wasn't sabotage. It was simply what happened when Miller refused to hire real staff and had built his entire foundation on an invisible teenager doing unpaid work. Customers noticed. Foot traffic dipped. Tips dropped. A few of the neighborhood moms whispered to each other while picking up lattes. Everyone could smell the instability even if nobody said it directly. Instead of fixing the problems, Miller went for drama. He announced a fresh relaunch as if a new name could fix operational chaos. Overnight, Crossroads Cup became the morning brew. New signage, new logo, new mugs, same broken equipment, same financial hole. He held a little ribbon-cutting event in the cafe parking lot. He gave a speech about new beginnings, acting like he was unveiling a national chain instead of repainting the same failing business. Liliana took photos. Caroline clapped too hard. Neighbors politely stood around like they were watching a school play. But a name change didn't fix closing's mistakes or low turnout. The Morning Brew stumbled harder than Crossroads Cup ever did. That was when Miller's mask started slipping fast and publicly. He began showing up to the cafe looking exhausted one day, furious the next. He yelled at baristas for messing up orders he hadn't trained them to make. He blamed suppliers for delays, customers for being too picky, and employees for not being committed. He never blamed himself. Then the drinking started. Quiet at first, then noticeable. His eyes were red during afternoon hours. His voice got louder during dinner time. He paced more, snapped more, and repeated the same lines like a man rehearsing excuses for a fallout he could feel coming. At home, things were worse. Caroline tried to keep the image together, but the cracks showed. One morning I walked into my grandparents' kitchen and heard Caroline arguing with my grandmother about money. Low at first, then breaking into tears. She claimed she didn't need help, then broke down crying. She kept insisting it wasn't supposed to be like this. We just need time. My grandmother didn't argue back. She just looked tired. Within a week, Caroline started pawning her jewelry. First a bracelet, then some earrings, then a necklace Miller gave her years ago. She tried to hide it by spacing things out, but any adult in the family could see what was happening. Jewelry boxes don't empty themselves. I heard her telling my grandfather, "We just needed enough to cover rent at the cafe, and maybe one loan payment, just temporary." She said temporary like it meant something. When the cafe had been sinking for years, when Miller found out, he didn't react like a spouse worried about bills. He reacted like a man losing a prop that helped his story. He snapped at Caroline saying, "How are you supposed to show up to events without anything decent to wear?" He didn't care that she sold those pieces to stop the cafe from collapsing. He cared that she wouldn't look right. The image mattered more than the marriage, the money, or the sanity of anyone involved. Meanwhile, Eric kept stopping by. At first, he tried helping with repairs at the cafe or suggesting budget cuts. Miller dismissed every suggestion before Eric even finished speaking. Eric told me privately, "He's repeating the old cycle. He spirals, he blames everyone else, and then he tries to rebuild the fantasy." He pushed harder for intervention, talking to both sets of grandparents, trying to get Caroline away from the chaos long enough to think clearly. He wasn't dramatic, just realistic. "If he doesn't slow down, he's going to burn the entire structure to the ground," he said, and that's exactly what it felt like. The cafe wasn't just failing, it was pulling the entire family down with it. Neighbors noticed the cracks. Extended relatives whispered about Miller's behavior. Caroline was barely holding herself together. Liliana kept posting polished photos like none of this existed. And Miller stormed around town pretending everything was fine while losing control of every part of his life. For the first time, the problem wasn't just between me and my parents. It wasn't just about tuition or favoritism or a bad argument. It was the entire system collapsing in public. Everyone could see it now. Everyone could feel the pressure. And nobody, not even Miller, could pretend it was just a misunderstanding anymore. The move-in day should have been normal. Students hauling boxes, parents crying, roommates awkwardly introducing themselves. Mine started like that for about 10 minutes, just long enough for me to think the worst was behind me. My grandparents were with me helping set up my dorm, and Uncle Eric stood by the door reviewing a packet of legal forms he brought just in case. Then everything shifted. A woman with a campus badge and a radio clipped to her belt stepped up to us. "Are you Cash?" she asked. "We've got a situation downstairs. Your father's at the front desk insisting you're being enrolled against your will." My grandparents froze. Eric didn't. He just muttered, "Of course he did," and shut the folder calmly. We took the elevator down. Before the doors fully opened, we heard Miller's voice booming through the hallway. "He's being pressured," Miller shouted. "He doesn't even understand what he's signing. He's being pushed into this by his grandparents." The staff member tried to cut in, but Miller got louder. "He's unstable," he snapped like the word tasted practiced. "He's not in his right mind. You can't let him enroll like this." A group of parents and freshmen stood around pretending not to stare. Security kept their distance, trying to de-escalate without making a scene, but there was no way to avoid one. Miller wasn't whispering accusations, he was broadcasting them. When he saw me, he pointed like he'd caught a criminal. "There, that's him. You can't let him sign anything. He's not mentally fit to make decisions." Eric stepped between us immediately. "Miller, stop. You have no legal authority here. Cash is 18 now." Miller ignored him. "Cash, come home. This isn't you. They're using you for money and controlling your life." I didn't raise my voice. "No, they're helping me because you wouldn't." That threw gasoline on the fire. "You think you're better than me now," Miller shouted. "You walk around acting like you built yourself. You're nothing without my name." Students around us slowed down, watching openly now. Miller kept going. "This is your fault. All of it. You and your grandparents ruined everything. He stepped forward like he wanted to corner me. Eric moved in faster, blocking him without touching him. Miller, Eric said quietly, walk away. Don't add criminal charges to your problems. For a moment, Miller looked stunned that his own brother wasn't taking his side. Then he laughed bitterly. You always loved playing the hero. You think helping him makes you better than me? I finally stepped past Eric and looked Miller directly in the eyes. My voice was cold. You didn't lose the cafe because of me. You lost it because you spent 20 years pretending to be a man you weren't. Miller blinked, startled by the tone. You drained every resource we had to keep up an image you couldn't afford, I continued. You gambled the business on pride. You let Liliana burn through the college fund like it was decoration money. Mom's selling jewelry. You're rebranding cafes that never made a profit. He looked around, suddenly aware that people were listening. And now, I said, you're in a college hallway screaming lies because you can't control me anymore. His face went red. You ungrateful, I cut him off. Liliana dropped out last week, didn't she? You didn't tell anyone, but Grandma told me she saw the letter on the counter. She's moving back home because you can't pay her rent. And Mom, she's broke because she carried every bill you pretended didn't exist. You didn't fail because of me. You failed because you kept pretending you were above reality. Miller reached for me again, furious and shaking. One of the guards stepped in this time. Sir, you need to calm down. But I wasn't finished. You're trespassing, I said. You have no right to interfere with my enrollment. If you don't leave and you keep harassing us, we'll file a report. There's also footage of how you treated Grandma last week. Every parent nearby stiffened. A few whispered. Miller froze. He knew exactly what I meant. He also knew Eric had copies. Caroline had shoved him away from Grandma when he grabbed her arm too hard during an argument 3 days earlier. The security camera on their porch caught it clearly. Eric already had it backed up. He'd copied it the same night it happened because he'd been waiting for Miller to cross a line that couldn't be talked away. Miller's voice faltered. You're lying. No, I'm done lying for you. The guard turned to him. Sir, you need to come with us. Miller tried to resist, shouting, He's my son, this is a family matter. But the hallway was full now. Students, parents, faculty, all watching him unravel. 2 guards took him by the arms and escorted him toward the exit as he kept yelling, Cash, you'll regret this. You're nothing without me. He didn't look powerful anymore. He looked small, a man screaming to keep control over something he already lost. Caroline wasn't there. Liliana wasn't either. But word spread fast. Within hours, Liliana called my grandmother, crying about how everything was unfair and ruined. By the end of the week, she had moved back home and taken a minimum wage job she hated, complaining every day that life was attacking her. As for Miller, he spiraled publicly. Relatives distanced themselves, neighbors stopped pretending. The smear campaign collapsed when people realized the screaming man at the enrollment desk wasn't a victim. He was unmasked. After Miller was removed, Eric touched my shoulder. You handled that better than most adults. My grandfather nodded. This is the clean break you needed. We finished the enrollment paperwork without any more surprises. My grandparents helped me carry the last few boxes up to my dorm. No lectures, no pressure, no guilt. When they left, I walked to my first lecture hall. I didn't look back down the hallway where Miller had been dragged out. I didn't look at my phone to check for messages. I didn't think about the Cafe Liliana's meltdown or the collapsing family image. I took my seat in the lecture room, pulled out a notebook, and waited for the professor to start. For the first time in my life, I wasn't operating under someone else's shadow or cleaning up someone else's mess. The door had closed.